Awesome. Please grab a seat. It's great to be here. This is kind of home for us. We 2 kids and 4 grandkids live in Christchurch, and we were here for 15 years, so it's great to be here. And it's so exciting to see so many familiar faces, but also just to, I mean this in the best possible way, looking around, this is not the church that I expected to see. It feels so young and vibrant, and so many young people, so many young families, and I just felt, just watching on the stage, I felt like there's a real anointing of celebration here, and I felt because of that, God say, because there's already an anointing of celebration, He's going to restore the harvest. And there's a passage in Isaiah 9, you have enlarged the nation, you've increased their joy, they rejoice before you as people rejoice at the harvest. And because you've already got an environment of celebration and joy, God's going to restore a real harvest in this place. So I really bless you, and so good to be here. Thanks, guys, and awesome music as always at Equippers Churches. So hey, we're kind of based in the UK most of the time now. It's going into the 3rd year of Equippers College there. But we had our Shout Europe conference just a few weeks ago, and then in about 3 or 4 weeks I think, there's Shout conference here. And so Pastor John asked me to talk a bit about it. I talked about it before the conference in the UK, and I've talked a bit around Auckland, and hopefully it's going to come up. One of the things we talk about in Equippers a bit is know the why behind the what. And it's not just that, we're doing this thing. It's like, why are we doing this thing? And the more that I understand why, then I can understand what are the key parts of it. So then it's like, how do I engage with this thing? How do I get the most out of this experience? Because I understand why we're doing it. It's just not like Pastor John always go, come on, you should come to Auckland, come to Shout. It's like, this is why we do this thing as Equippers. And so, these are maybe, and one of the things I hope you get, there's a whole lot of things that can seem incidental, but they're actually part of the thing. And so they're not add-ons to the thing, they are the thing. And so the more that you understand the elements, it's like, I know how to get everything out of Shout. So I guess I'm kind of speaking to 3 groups. If you're already going to Shout in about a month, I hope you feel like, man, my understanding of what this thing has gone to another level, my expectation has gone to another level, and I feel I can get everything out of it. But maybe there's some other people like not currently going. I hope some of you are like, man, I got to get in the room because I get why we do this thing. And maybe if you're new to church or new to this church, you're like, I thought church was just about coming here on Sundays. Now I understand why we do this thing of this national conference. Is that all right? So hopefully it's going to come up. So good way to start talking about anything is Jesus, right? He's kind of the center. So now, Jesus, as a first century Jewish guy, is plugged into the religious life of his time and his culture. But he did this interesting thing. He turned the whole thing on its head because one of his sayings, Matthew 2:27, is this. He said to them, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. It's not that there's all these duties and obligations. I get when God has put something in place, He put it in place for my good. It's not I got to go because I feel guilty or I'll be condemned if I don't. It's like, no, I understand. This is good for me. I believe in a good Father. If He's put something in place, He's put it in place because it's for my good to engage with this thing. And so one of their practices was around the Sabbath. So once a week they would stop. As a family they would gather, and then in their local synagogue they would gather. And so Jesus is like, I get this is for me. It's not me having to do this. It's for me. And so Luke 4:46, it just talks about in his ministry, he went to Nazareth where he'd been brought up, and on the Sabbath day he went into the synagogue, just says, as was his custom. So it's like, I get this is for me. It's not guilt, it's not whatever. It's like, I just make a custom of this because it's for me. Now, other times, Luke 5, Jesus would withdraw to deserted places and pray. So he has his own relationship with God by himself, but still as the Son of God, he's like, it's good for me to turn up in my local community once a week, and so I make a custom of it. You know, back in the day, a generation ago, people were like, if you don't pray, if you don't go to church, it's guilt, it's all heavy. And then we kind of did this pendulum swing like, no, I just need to be authentic and be real. So, I didn't feel like coming to church, so I didn't want to be a hypocrite, so I went for a walk on the beach, and I, felt close to God. And it's like, that's great, but actually we've kind of come back to the middle point that actually I'm formed by my habits. And it's like, I get that this is for me, that I just make this a custom to keep turning up because it's for me. It's not guilt that I don't, it's for me. And so this kind of concept, Matthew 11 in the Message translation, learn the unforced rhythms of grace. There's a rhythm of going out and having my personal devotions. But for Jesus, there was this rhythm of just turning up weekly with the people of God in his local environment. And like, this is for me. And when you go back to the Old Testament law about this, you see probably where he got the idea, oh, this is for me. And it's in Exodus 23, verse 12, where it just says this: 6 days do your work, but on the seventh day do not work, so that your ox and donkey may rest, and so that the slave born in your household and the foreigner living among you may be refreshed. He's like, I get this is for me. It's for my rest and refreshment. So I'm going to have my personal devotional connection with God, but I'm going to make a practice once a week. I just take some time out because this was God's idea for my rest and my refreshment. This is a good idea that I do this thing. It's for me. But where I'm going in terms of shout is the very next verses talk about another rhythm that they had at that time. So at Exodus 23, 14 to 17, 3 times a year you are to celebrate a festival to me. List them: festival of unleavened bread, festival of harvest, festival of ingathering. 3 times a year all the men are to appear before the sovereign Lord. Okay, so you got it? So Jesus has his own personal devotional life with God by himself. He has this weekly rhythm of just turning up with his local community. But for them, 3 times a year, they all gathered together in one place as the combined people of God. And this was a bit, there's no cars, there's no planes, whatever. From Galilee, it's like a 4 to 5 day walk. And one of the festivals lasts 8 days. And then you 4 or 5 days walking home again. So your boss says, hey, you're good for work tomorrow? He's like, no, I'm away the next 2.5 weeks. What are you doing? I'm going to the festival in Jerusalem. So it was like, in a sense, this major imposition. 3 times a year, you packed up, walked for 5 days, did this thing all together, and walked home again. But if the logic applied, Jesus kind of got like, this is for me. Like something happens in that environment that doesn't happen in my personal devotions, that doesn't happen in my weekly gathering with my local community. But when we all gather together, this is a different thing about this. This is everyone who calls themselves, in this case, the people of Israel, are all together in one place. Something different happens. It's another rhythm that's for my good. And so, and again, as a child, Luke 2, this was another custom. Every year, Jesus' parents went to Jerusalem for the festival of the Passover. When he was 12 years old, they went up to the festival according to the custom, right? So he's got a custom of going out into the wilderness and praying. He's got a custom of turning up weekly in his local community. But as a child, his parents put in them, hey, we also have this other custom. We walk for 5 days to Jerusalem and we celebrate the festival and we walk home again. Sometimes, particularly in Shout in Europe, talk to people like, oh, great to see you. You kids here? And they're like, oh, no, it's so much hassle. We didn't bring them, and it's like, oh no, we want to socialize them into this custom that we assemble together and I'm part of this bigger thing, and something happens in that environment. So again, as an adult, Jesus still do this. John 2, when it was almost time for the Jewish Passover, Jesus went up to Jerusalem. Like he's got 3 years ministry. He interrupted, in a sense, to do these long walks to go and turn up, because he's like, I get this is for me. Verse 23, while he was in Jerusalem at the Passover festival. John 5, sometime later, Jesus went to Jerusalem for one of the Jewish festivals. He's like, I got my personal devotion, I got my weekly synagogue, and I got these annual festivals that are for me, that I engage with this. So I hope you start to wonder, I wonder what it is about these things that add something to my life that I'm not going to get from my devotions and I'm not going to get from my weekly assembly with my local community. What are these things for that God put them in place for us? Because that's where, build the bridge, I'm arguing Shout is our equivalent of the annual festivals. of the Old Testament. And so why, so we encourage personal devotions. We encourage you to come to church in your local community weekly. But we have these conferences like Stronger or Equip or Shout. And we go, something happens there that's for you. And it's like, so what is this thing? So Exodus 23 says this. I'm trying to go, what is this thing? What is Shout? Because, we often we've talked in Auckland over a number of years, like we call it conference, but it's not really a conference. It's not like a work conference where we have all these big name speakers and, I'm going to go to this session to hear this person talk on this topic and this person and this person. It's like, we have speakers, but we don't make a big thing about them. And we certainly never say who's on which session because it's not about them. So what is it about? It's somehow everyone together in the room together, and we'll have speakers and they'll bring significant messages, but that's actually not the main thing. So what is this thing? And Exodus 23, it just says this. They have a phrase in the NIV, English, celebrate a festival. So it's not like a normal work conference. It's what is it? And I just... If you put up the next slide, it's this, the Hebrew word for all of that. It's quite a complex idea. It's just Hagag. It's like, what are we going to do in a month? We're going to Hagag in Auckland. That's what they do. What are we doing? We're going to Shout Arena we're going to Hagag. It's quite a complex, literally it means to celebrate a pilgrimage festival. And it's like, what is this thing Shout? It's a Hagag. That's what we do. We have our personal devotions, we have our weekly church, but then as Equippers nationally, Acts Church nationally, Apostolic globally this time, like there's leaders of 10 churches from African nations turning out, we're going to Hagag. So there's this Hagag happening. And it's like, okay, what's that? And there's at least 4 elements to it. There's a sense we gather together. There's a sense of actually undertaking a pilgrimage. Another word and phrase in Hebrew is shalosh regalim, which means the 3 journeys. Literally the 3 times you use your feet. And I find it helpful because suddenly I thought, all that walking around, finding cafes, walking from parking buildings, that's not the add-ons, that's part of the experience. Bumping into people, hey, should we go out for a coffee? Like, that's part of the Hagag. They literally, if you rode a donkey to Jerusalem, you had to get off the donkey at the end and walk the last part. And it's like, for me it was helpful. No, Shout doesn't start when the speaker comes on stage, doesn't actually even start when the worship team. It starts when you get in your car and drive to the airport. It's the whole, and that's kind of what I want to say. Like, man, I want to understand, how do I engage with the total experience of Hagagging in Auckland? And it's like, I want to get everything out of it. And it starts with this whole experience. The third thing is it's a celebration, and there's a distinctless aspect of joy, of singing and dancing. So again, it's like, there's the driving, there's the worship, there's the mosh pit. It's like, this is part of Hagag. It's not the big name speaker. It's the total experience. Interesting for the total Bible nerds among us, Theological Dictionary of the Old Testament, which put this up, especially noteworthy is the phrase, the hug, which is short for Hagag, of Yahweh, found 4 times. This obviously ancient expression is based on the notion that the deity himself, God himself, celebrates his own festival, participation in which is a favor granted or an obligation imposed upon people. It's like God has called for a Hagag. He's like, I'm ready to come and celebrate with my people at Spark Arena in Auckland. And we're coming together to Hagag with God. Because he's going to be there to celebrate a festival, and we're going to connect with him in this celebration. So it's like, man. The other phrase that's used is Leviticus 23:4 says this: these are the Lord's appointed festivals, the sacred assemblies. There's 2 things, this idea of a summons and assembly. Now, I think the closest thing in our day is actually the Olympics. So the traditional language of the closing ceremony is this, that they're going to put it up, hopefully. It says this, in accordance with the tradition, I call upon the youth of the world to assemble. And actually, I noticed there's a 3rd word on the 3rd line that's important. 4 years from now in Los Angeles, to celebrate. This call to assemble, to celebrate. the youth of the world in one place. That's the language of a Hagag. It's like equippers. There's a call to assemble in Auckland in a month. Apostolic Church globally, there's a call to assemble in New Zealand in a month because God is going to meet with us and something is going to happen. So it's like, oh man, this is why we do this thing. And yeah, it was pretty much a hassle walking 5 days from Galilee to Jerusalem to be somewhere. But it's like, no, something happens with engaging with this whole process, finding the accommodation, walking around, finding the cafes, meeting up with people, bumping up to people in the street, the worship, finding your seat, the speakers, the ministry, the response. It's like, rather than like, resisting it, it's like, no, embrace the total thing. Because this is another rhythm that's for our good. And so I want to look at, we probably won't get through them all. I've got 6 different facets of what are the parts of a Hagag. So you know, these are the elements, so now I know how to engage with this. Is that all right? So the first one is this. It's actually for the worship of God. It's like, you know, it's the classic cliche joke about worship. It's like, I don't really like the worship at Shout. Oh, it wasn't for you. It was for God. We assembled, like I'll do my private devotion. I'll assemble weekly in Equippers Christchurch. But this is Equippers nationally and internationally. This is Acts churches nationally. This is Apostolic Church globally coming in one place. For the first purpose of it is that together we worship God. And it's like, oh man, so the worship isn't the warm-up act for the speaker. The worship is actually, once we've got there, the pilgrimage, the first thing we do is worship. So again, Exodus 23, where it lists them, if you notice this, 3 times a year you're to celebrate a festival to me. It's not a conference of interesting speakers for me. It's a celebrate a festival for God, to God. And down the bottom, you are all the 3 times a year there to appear before the Lord. We're not appearing before Sam Monk or Bruce Monk or anyone. We're appearing before God in Spark Arena as the people of God. This is another dynamic of our faith, to worship God together. I feel like some of you are like, oh, I'm starting to get, now I get what we're doing. Like, I've been going to this thing, but now I understand the why behind the what. So now I can engage with it. I'm not going to wait for the speaker to see if I like the speaker. Soon as the worship starts, this is what we've assembled to do first, to worship God. I don't know if you've ever read the story when the people of Israel come out of Egypt and head to the promised land. And I've always, Moses kind of said, hey, let us go that we might worship God. And I thought, it's kind of like nudge, nudge, wink, wink, like, that's not really what we're doing. We're actually going. We're not coming back. But when I read the story, I was like, it actually is a big deal. Like, this is the reason. So just to show real quickly, Exodus 7, let my people go so that they may worship me. Exodus 8:1, let my people go that they may worship me. Exodus 8:20, let my people go that they may worship me. Exodus 9:1, let my people go that they may worship me. God's pretty serious about this. It's not a throwaway line. And so then by Exodus 10, let my people go that they may worship me. Pharaoh's officials finally are like, just let them go. Why? So that they may worship the Lord their God. They get, this is the call. We're to let them go so that they can assemble together as the whole people in God, in one place, people of God, to worship their God. So then Exodus 10 verse 8, they go back and Pharaoh says, okay, go and worship your God, but who's going? And this is where it's interesting. Moses said, no, we will go with our young and our old, with our sons and daughters, with our flocks, because we are, here's the first reference, to celebrate a festival to the Lord. No, it can't be just some of us. That's not a festival. Yeah, we can have our private devotions. We can gather partially. But this thing, we all got to be there. And that's why as part of Equippers, it's like, man, if money's a problem, if there's a challenge, talk to us. Because if we just need everyone in the room. Because it's not a Hagag if there's people missing who wanted to be there but can't be there. Moses is like, no, you've got to let us all go. And so then in Exodus 10:24, Pharaoh finally says, okay, go, you can take all the people, but you can't take your flocks. And this is what Moses' interesting response, no, you must allow us to have sacrifices and offerings. We have to use some of them in worshiping the Lord our God. And until we get there, we will not know what we are to use to worship the Lord. So I don't know what's going to happen at Shout, but I know God's going to call upon us to worship Him. And I'm going there expecting that together we're going to worship. I don't know if He's going to be asking me to go and be at the altar or surrender my life in new ways. I don't know if He's asking us to praise or spiritual warfare. I don't know, but we are assembling to worship God. And it's like, oh, now I get what this is about. Something happens. And something significant actually happens as Equippers New Zealand when we worship in Te Reo. Even the German pastors go, the hairs on the back of my neck stand up when I go to Shout in New Zealand and you sing in Māori language. And like, yeah, something happens when we worship as the people of the land together in this place. So the first thing, we come to worship. The second thing, they're marked by rejoicing, the festivals. Life can just get a bit of a plod, a grind. And these were put for our good. It's like for them 3 times a year, I'm going to interrupt the grind and I'm just going to go and we're going to have a massive party. And, so again, Deuteronomy 16, think about living under the law, the commands. You shall rejoice in your festival with your son and your daughter, your male and female. It's a command. You have to have a happy time in Auckland when you go to Shout. It's a command. Be happy. Oh, I'm miserable, I'm tired, I'm stressed, and I've got a headache. So, no, you're not hagagging unless it's marked by rejoicing. In fact, the whole point of haggaga almost becomes the new benchmark for church. So Isaiah 30 says this, uses similes, and you will sing. How will you sing? As on the night you celebrate a holy festival. Your hearts will rejoice. How will they rejoice? At what level? As when people playing pipes go up to the mountain of the Lord. It's almost like after Shout, you come back and go, do you remember how we worshipped on that last night of Shout? Come on, let's do that again here. Do you remember how everyone flocked to the altar in responsiveness? Come on, let's create that responsive culture here. Do you remember how the mosh pit and people are leaping all around? Come on, let's create that here. It becomes the new standard for church. It kind of breaks us out of our routines and our mundane, and it kind of says, man, this is what can happen when God's people gather. And it's like, man, this is what we're going after. I found a Jewish website that talked about the ideas about celebrating festivals today. So if we've got that, if you put that up, it says this. There are 4 components to the mitzvah, which means the instruction or the law of rejoicing. The first one is this. This is their 4 points. The Torah refers to the festivals and to Shabbat as sacred convocations, which translates into a mitzvah or commandment or instruction to sanctify them with festive meals and celebratory clothes. So there's this kind of cliche thing around Auckland about, it's the woman normally, like, have you got your shout fit yet? Which is short for shout outfit. It's kind of biblical. Well, I don't know if it's biblical, but it's 3,500 years of Jewish interpretation of what it means, and it's like, make it special. Celebratory clothes and our festive meals, and it's like, yeah, kids, we're going to go to McDonald's 3 nights in a row. Like, whoa, or whatever you do, but it's like, the whole point is, Shout isn't with the speakers. It's like, whatever works for you, make the whole thing fun and special. It goes on, number 2, we should do something extra which will permeate the entire festival with joy. So this traditionally involves having wine or alcoholic beverages with the meals for men, wear newly bought clothing or jewelry for women, and having fruit and candy for children. It's like, do you see what I mean? Shout is not the speaker. Shout is, worship is important, but it's like, make the whole thing fun. So I was talking about this in England, and a mum of 3 little girls said, oh, I got it. So we're going to have, because for them it's like a 30-minute drive each day. We're going to get a bag with special treats and goodies in the bag, and we're going to get some new pens, and they can draw. But I'm also going to put a card in there for them to write what are they believing for at Shout. And it's like, we're going to make the whole thing fun. And again, oh man, if we've got to fly and I've got kids, how am I going to make the flight fun? How am we going to make staying fun? It's the cafes, the restaurant. The whole thing is kind of, this is actually what a Hagag is about. How do we kind of go, this is the one time of the year or 3 times a year where we actually intentionally have fun and celebrate. Number 3, there's a mitzvah instruction to sing, dance, or go on outings. So again, in the UK, often people come over from Europe, Shout finishes Friday night, they're like, oh, we're going to stay around Saturday and do a day trip into London. It's not quite as exciting, but maybe you can stay around a day in Auckland and do a day trip around, I don't know what you're doing, Sky Tower or the zoo or a cruise on the harbour or something. But it's like, again, do you see, these aren't extra. This is like, make the total experience a celebration. And the final one is this. Throughout the festival, number 4, there is a mitzvah to be in a good mood and to avoid whatever causes anguish. It is therefore forbidden to mourn, eulogize, or fast. Yeah. There's a time to fast. It's before shout. It's not at shout. At shout, go to the cafes, go to the restaurants, have fun, enjoy connecting with people. Make sure your kids have a great time there. They go, this is one of the highlights of our year. This is not gotta go. It's like, no, a Hagag is made for you to inject life and joy back into you. Look, the third point is that it's kind of 2 points together. That we're all together, and as we do that, we actually do hear from God. So Pastor Bruce Monk's written a new book. It's coming out soon. I had a chance to read it. Interesting, it's about the history of equippers. How many significant messages came at Shout Conference that shaped the life of equippers? But I don't know about you. For me too, when I look back over my life, how many significant encounters were at conferences? And it's not like, oh, you got caught up in the emotion. No, like as a 15-year-old, no, I responded around giving my life to God. I'm still working that out 47 years later. It wasn't emotion. Like, we actually do hear from God. We hear significant messages. God downloads stuff to us. But this whole thing, something happens when we do that all together in these environments. I don't understand why. I just know that it happens. So again, Exodus 23, 3 times a year. Here's the thing. All of the people are to appear before the Lord. Hey, yeah, do your devotions. Hey, yeah, turn up weekly in your local community. But these things is like, it's important that we're all there. So again, Exodus 10, Moses said, we will go with our young and our old, with our sons and our daughters, with our flocks and our herds, because we are to celebrate a festival. So I said, man, we want everyone in the room. I'm sure Pastor Jono doesn't want coming back afterwards. Oh, I wanted to go, but I couldn't. Or I couldn't afford it. Or I couldn't get the time. It's like, no, if anyone who wants to be there, we want people in the room. Deuteronomy 16, specifically the marginalized. You shall rejoice in your festival with your son, your daughter, your male and female slave, the Levite, the stranger, the orphan, the widow. They're like, you got to find a way to get everyone there who wants to be there, because something significant's going to happen. But that's what I want to say. When you actually look in the Bible, significant stuff happened at these places. So the first festival, I said, is when they came out of Egypt. What happens? Exodus 9, that Moses led all the people out of the camp to meet with God. What happens? He comes down off the mountain with the 10 Commandments. Shaped the life of Israel for the next 3,500 years. Shaped Western ethics for the next 3,500 years. Like, we just thought we were coming to worship God. We got the 10 Commandments. We got the covenant. Nehemiah 8 is a fascinating story. So, again, the people of Israel fell away, went into exile. God restores them. They rebuild. And Nehemiah 8 is a famous story where they come together to renew their covenant. So, again, Nehemiah 8 verse 1, all of the people came together as one. So again, everyone's together. It's not one of their traditional festivals, but Nehemiah said, we want everyone together. And so they start reading the law. And then down in verse 9, if you put that up. So here's a famous story, if you go to the next one. Then Nehemiah, so people start weeping because they realize we haven't done what God wanted. Nehemiah the governor, Ezra the priest, others, instructing them, said, this day is holy to the Lord your God. Do not mourn or weep. It's a holy day. It's where we get the idea holiday, where the festivals. That's the ethos of, this is my holiday, holy day. For all the people had been weeping. Nehemiah says this, go and enjoy choice food and sweet drinks and send some to those who have nothing prepared. This day is holy to the Lord. Do not grieve. A famous verse, for the joy of the Lord is your strength. But I realized, he's saying, treat this as a festival. And so if you go to the next one, they say this, the Levites calmed all the people, be still, for this is a holy day, do not grieve. You don't grieve on your holy days, your holidays. Then all the people went away to eat and drink, to send portions of food, to celebrate with great joy, because they now understood the words. I think they're like, we misunderstood. We thought this was a day of fasting and penitence. You're saying this is a festival. We know how to do festivals. You get nice food, you get nice drink, you give it to other people. Like, now we get how to do this thing. Let's have a party. Let's buy extra nice food rather than the opposite of fasting. And so again, and what happens? Their covenant is renewed for the next 2,500 years. They get their identity as the people of God. Go into the New Testament, Matthew 5. Again, it's not one of the formal festivals. It just says, when Jesus saw the crowds, he went up on a mountain and he sat down. It just says this, his disciples came to him. Sat down doesn't mean he's having a rest. It means he's assuming the position of a teacher, a rabbi ready to teach. And I find this really... It's like we often like, why, Pastor John, why can't you meet me for a counseling appointment or whatever? And it's like, part of it is God actually creates this environment, and the onus is on us to gather together and assemble, because he does stuff in those environments. And then we can do the counseling and other stuff out of that. But it's like, Jesus said, I'm sitting here ready, now you come and assemble. Like, I'm calling for a Hagag, essentially, where you're going to all assemble and then I'm going to teach. And again, what happens? They get the Sermon on the Mount, the greatest sermon that's ever been preached, the foundational manifesto of Jesus. They didn't all they knew is Jesus has created this environment, and we come and assemble, and we're going to worship and we're going to rejoice. Interesting, the whole thing of multiplying the food happens in those contexts. Again, celebration. But also, we're going to get some significant input into our lives. And it's like, probably often environments like Shout are life-defining moments. People get dreams, they get visions for ministry, for careers, for study, for business, and they're challenged, and God redirects people. That's what happens at Hagags. And again, Acts 2. In those days, Peter stood up among the believers. It was a group about 120. It's not about the numbers. I think the first Shout was 150 people. But it's about everyone who's part of this thing is here. And then what happens? When the day of Pentecost came, they were all together in one place. And suddenly the Holy Spirit comes, and then quickly it multiplies to 3,000. But what I'm saying, you get significant messages and you have significant encounters. Yes, I can meet God in my personal devotion. Yeah, we love coming to church and God ministers. But something happens at Hagags, where we get significant input and significant direction. So so in light of that, one of the how-to things is this next point. They were really encouraged, set apart this time. So I love one of the festivals, the Feast of Tabernacles, which was the 8-day one. They were to live in temporary shelters, if you can put up the next one, for 7 days. All native-born Israelites are to live in such shelters. And it's like people came from all around the nation, and it's like, just build a little temporary shelter out of palm trees and stay there. But the interesting thing, even the people in Jerusalem had to do that. Like, but my pillow's calling up in my room. Why can't I stay there? And I got my fridge with my food and my cold drink. Like, why do I got to go and live in a little? It's like at a big summer camping ground in New Zealand. It's like, that's my wife's idea of heaven and my idea of hell. Like, everyone's all crammed together and you're climbing over people and people are. But interesting, God, and this is what I think God was saying. Even hey, disrupt your normal routines. Don't try and fit this in. Like, and the temptation is, particularly in Auckland or in Surrey, and the 20 minutes travel, that's a hassle. I'll go to a couple of the evening sessions, but I'll have to slip out and do some work emails. God's like, no, set apart this time. Disrupt your normal routine for these days to give yourself to this thing. And, there's people, New Zealand students have been UK students have been saving for a year to come. People from Africa, hassle of getting visas to come. And for us, it's like, oh, it's such a hassle driving in traffic in Auckland, and I don't know if it's, and the whole thing, the honor of it, familiarity, kind of robs us of honor and the miracles. I won't have time to look at it, but Mark 6, where Jesus, when he goes to his hometown, he can't do miracles because they're like, we see what Pastor Wayne and Libby leading worship. We hear Pastor Sam. Like, why do we got to go to the hassle of going to Auckland? It's like familiarity could rob us. And they're saying, come on, set apart this time. In fact, if you go to Exodus 19, I love this. Go to the people and consecrate them today and tomorrow. Have them wash their clothes and be ready by the third day. It's like, actually, say, I'm not just going to, I'm going to pray, God, I need a new word at Shout. I need a fresh encounter. God, I need a fresh vision. Like, it actually doesn't start when you get in the car. It starts sometime before as I start to think and pray. And maybe I do fast and pray before. Like, God, this is a major hassle. I'm going there because I need a fresh encounter with you. And I get ready for it. In fact, I love Exodus 23 says this about the seventh month, festival for 7 days. The first day is a Sabbath rest. The 8th day is also a day of rest. He's like, I don't want you turning up at this thing tired. Like, I'm too tired. I'll just stay home. I've got a bit of a headache. Sleep through the first session. And then near the end, like, man, I got work tomorrow. I might skip the last session. He's like, no, rest before it. Rest at the end so you can give yourself completely to this thing while you're there. Because we're going to hagag. We're going to assemble together. We're going to worship. We're going to celebrate. We're going to get significant messages from God. And so I want to be ready to set apart this, like it's once a year. We're going to set apart these days. I'm going to give everything to this. And that involves the walking around and going out for coffee and going to meals and being in sessions. And it's like the total experience I want to engage with. Let me just quickly, one more point, and then let me summarize some stuff around Shout Europe. The final thing I think to understand is part of the how-to of festivals, they were a place where people brought offerings. So again, Leviticus 23. These are the Lord's appointed festivals which are to proclaim as sacred assemblies for bringing food offerings to the Lord. Down in verse 38, these are in addition to those for the Lord's Sabbath. Numbers 29 says, in addition to what you vow, offer these. And I think, again, part of Shout is the full altars, where people are like, I just want to give my life to you, God. I've been around church, but I actually haven't experienced you. I haven't been filled with the Spirit. I've kind of wandered away. I feel you calling to give. I feel you're calling to give my life to you. And, one of the things that always strikes me at Shout is both New Zealand and UK. Often one of the first people responding to the offerings is at the altar calls is Pastor Kathy Monk. And it's like, but I kind of sit there like, I don't know if I should go, and people will be thinking, what's wrong with him, and what's his issue, and it's too many people in the row. But kind of to go, no, part of Shout is this thing of a fresh offering of myself to God. And so I'm going to go expecting to do that. Really, God, if I think there's a slightest hint that you're speaking to me, I'm going to offer myself to you. I'm going to respond to that. And also, I haven't got time to talk about, there's financial things, and people are like, they get offended, like, I paid for my ticket, why are they asking? And it's like, no, this is part of the thing. And so there's an interesting, Numbers 29, final kind of point, and then I'll summarize. This festival for 7 days. First day, offer 13 young bulls. Second day, 11. Second day, 12. Third, 11. Fourth, 10. Fifth, 9. Sixth, 8. Seventh, 7. Go to the next slide. It's like, we're often like, finally by the last thing, okay, I'll put some spare change in the offering bucket, or I might respond to the altar call. They're like, no, go there expecting to bring your best and biggest offering of yourself and or financially on the first day. Like, go with this expectation. I'm part of the Hagag as I'm going there to bring an offering. And so I'm the first altar call. If I feel like God's speaking to me, I'm going to be at the front. Because I want to give everything to God, and I want to get everything from God that I can. There's a final thing which we don't have time to go into, but I just want to say it's the thing of service there. So, that's a great idea. Pastor Sam often talks about the story of turning the water into wine, it says the servants knew that it was a miracle, the guests didn't. So part of Kupa's culture is, I just don't want to attend Shout. I want to serve there because we get to see the miracles. And I haven't got time to go into it, but if you look at the environments for the festivals with the tabernacle and the temple, they weren't based around a couple of special people. They were based, everyone who was willing and had skills made it happen. And I think Shout goes to another level when it's like, I just didn't attend Shout, I helped make it happen. So I just wanted to finish just with 4 quick stories about what I saw in Shout Europe when people served. And to go, and again, I want to create, it's interesting talking to people around New Zealand. There's just this sense like something is happening around the world of a move of God and just supernatural things breaking out. And so I can say, oh, I saw stuff at Shout that I have in Europe that I haven't seen in 40 years of ministry. And so I want to just finish by, I pray your expectation when you go to Shout, God is going to do stuff. So again, I wasn't speaking in any of the main sessions or whatever, but I was asked on the final night, which you think, oh man, that's the thing. They asked if I'd speak to the 6 to 9-year-olds and the 10 and 11-year-olds. There's a little thing like, oh, I'm going to miss out on the final night, but it's like, no, it's going to be okay. So, and they asked me to talk about the power of God and to pray for kids to be filled with the Holy Spirit. So I went to the 6 to 9-year-olds in this image, because I have grandkids who are always going to Willowbank. So I kind of got the idea they know how to kind of put their hand out and be gentle and quiet for the animals to come. And I said, oh, there's an image of the dove. And I just encourage, hey, just be open and quiet and let the dove of God's Spirit land on you. And all these little 6 and 7-year-olds were, just the presence of God was on them and touched by God. It was incredible. And then I walked over to the 10 and 11-year-olds and again did a similar thing, but really felt to talk about speaking in tongues and say, hey, if you haven't spoken in tongues but you'd like to, just put your hand up. I'm going to get some of the leaders to come and pray for you. And one girl afterwards shared the testimony, she said, I didn't have to wait for a leader. My friend next to me, another 10-year-old girl, spoke in tongues. So she put her hand on me and suddenly I found myself speaking in this language that I didn't know. So one 10-year-old was filled with the Spirit because another 10-year-old prayed for her. And there's a young Filipino girl who was just kind of not blubbering, but just deeply moved by God, and kids were being touched. And then I went to walk out the back, and we have some grandparents at the church in Surrey who bring their grandkids to church every week, and they've got a 10-year-old grandson who's severely autistic. And I've talked to them before. They're like, we're just believing God's going to touch him. And I was like, man, that's a big prayer. And he was at the back just doing his own thing. And when I walked out, I just kind of put my hand on his head and kept walking. And then, back to the end of the conference. And then afterwards, everyone's milling around, saying goodbye. And this boy walked past me with his grandmother. And when he walked past, he went like this. He went, the power of God. And his grandmother and I just looked shocked. And I said to her, oh, that's what I talked about. And she literally kind of put her hands over her mouth and she said, he only ever says one-word answers. For 5 years, what did you learn about at church today? God. And then he walks past and he goes, the power of God. And they've been believing for 5 years. I don't know, to go from a one-word answer to a 4-word phrase. And I saw his granddad at church on Sunday, and he said, oh yeah, his boy's name's Leo. He said, on Saturday morning, he said, I asked Leo, what did Steve talk about last night? And he said, the power of God. So for me, what my highlight of Shout wasn't the international speakers, it wasn't the worship. The highlight for me at Shout was a 10-year-old autistic boy in another room, not even in the auditorium, went from 1 word to 4 words. Some of you know Pastor Byron from Wellington. He went there, he was at Shout as well. Again, he didn't speak in the main sessions, but he spoke at the 10 and 11-year-olds and he spoke at the youth. And he came to Surrey Church on Sunday, and I went to get him a coffee with a barista, and I said to the lady there, oh, hey, can I get a coffee? It's not for a new person at church, it's for this guy from New Zealand, Pastor Byron. She's like, Byron, I got to meet him, I got a testimony for him. So I took her to meet him, and she talked about, on the last night, this boy who'd been in one of the sessions, again in another room, not in the main session, not the main speakers. Byron had talked there. This boy came up to Byron and said, could you sign my poster of Shout? And Byron said, okay. Signed it. And then he felt this prompting, could I pray for you? So he prayed for the boy, and then he felt he had a word for him. And then he said, man, I was real nervous in terms of kind of, appropriate behavior, but he really felt this prompting from the Holy Spirit to give the boy a hug. So he said, could I give you a hug? But upset. And so he hugged this boy, and the boy started crying, and his grandmother's standing there. And this woman who was the auntie, she said, he's my nephew. He doesn't come to Equippers. I've been trying to get him to Shout. And she said 18 months ago, his dad died, and he's never cried. And in a moment, this pastor feels led to give this boy a hug, and he starts crying. And the grandmother's like, we've been waiting 18 months to see that happen. There was another woman, two quick stories. Another woman from Surrey got a Muslim friend, older woman, Muslim friend, who's severely ill, probably late stage cancer, is going for an MRI the Monday after Shout. Says, why don't you come to this conference? We have a prayer and prophecy tent. There's some people who'll pray for you. So she takes this woman along, takes her to the prayer and prophecy tent. There's a guy and a woman from the Surrey church start praying for her. The guy starts praying in tongues over her. When he finishes, she looks at him and said, you're praying in Arabic. And you kept saying these phrases over and over again. Praise be to God, glory be to God. Praise be to God, glory be to God. We had one of the main speakers was a person who works in the Islamic world a lot. He's like, that is amazing. I have not heard of things like that. I haven't heard of things like that. I haven't seen things like that. And then the final story, in the middle of worship, there was a moment where they said, hey, just sing out in your own words. And we have some churches in Slovakia, and you know where this is going. A woman hears someone singing in Slovakian behind her. So when they stop, turns around, oh, you're from Slovakia? No. But you know Slovakian? No. She's like, but I heard you saying this, and this is where I wanted to land. I heard this cry. You were singing this. You're saying, please return to us again. I don't think that's about the second coming. I think that's about another move of the Holy Spirit. So you go, this Holy Spirit stirring up this cry for another move of God. I've been in ministry 40 years. I don't have stories like that. But a month ago, I saw an autistic boy start using phrases. I saw a traumatized boy suddenly release this grief. I heard a Muslim woman got to hear Christians praying in a language she understood. And a woman from Slovakia heard people calling out in her language. Like, something is going to happen. Can I invite you to stand? I'm just going to pray. And here's where I remember what I finished, where I said, it's like we will sing as we did at the festival. It's like it becomes the new benchmark for Equippers Christchurch. So I'd love us, probably gone over time, sorry, Jono, Pastor Jono, but I'd love us just to maybe worship for a moment and go, God, would you do it again in Auckland? And if you can't go there this year, it's not good. And then God, would you unlock that here in Equippers Christchurch? But could we see you move? Because we're ready to Hagag. We're going to celebrate. We're going to worship. We're going to get significant messages. We're going to respond. And God's Spirit is going to do something. Come on, let's just worship God for a minute.